A finance committee once spent more time picking the paint color for a bike shed than approving a nuclear reactor sitting on the same agenda. That is not an exaggeration, and it is not a modern anecdote either. It is the origin story of a principle now called the Law of Triviality, or Bikeshedding, and it explains more about how your meetings actually work than any leadership book on your shelf. The term comes from the British naval historian C. Northcote Parkinson, who first laid it out in 1957 in his book Parkinson's Law, The Pursuit of Progress. Parkinson had already made his name skewering bureaucracy, with his famous observation that work expands to fill the time available for its completion. That single line became one of the most quoted ideas in management writing. But the bike shed story, buried later in the same book, is his sharpest illustration of a different failure mode entirely. It's not about how long work takes. It's about how badly groups allocate their attention once you put them in a room together and hand them a list of things to decide. In Parkinson's account, a finance committee is handed several items on the same agenda. One is a massive, technically complex capital project, a nuclear power plant. The stakes are enormous. Get the engineering wrong, and the consequences are catastrophic and expensive. Common sense says this item should consume the meeting. It does not. The committee glances at the plans, defers to whoever on the committee understands reactors, and waves it through in minutes. Then the agenda moves to something smaller, a bicycle shed for the staff. And here the entire tone of the room changes. Suddenly everyone leans forward. Suddenly everyone has questions. What should the roof be made of? Where should the door face? Should it even be built out of brick instead of wood? The conversation that was supposed to take a few minutes stretches on, far longer than the reactor discussion ever did, because unlike the reactor, this is a topic where nobody needs permission to have an opinion. Why does this happen? Because almost nobody in that room understands nuclear engineering. Reactor design involves physics, safety systems, regulatory approval, and specialized cost modeling that only a handful of people in the building can meaningfully evaluate. Faced with that wall of complexity, the group does the rational thing. It defers to the experts, asks a few clarifying questions, and moves on. Nobody wants to be the person who asks an uninformed question about containment vessels in front of colleagues, so the room stays quiet and lets the specialists carry the decision. The bike shed is the opposite. Everyone has stood next to a bike shed, everyone has painted a fence, or picked a door, or has some intuition about what a roof should look like. There is no wall of complexity to stop them, and there is no professional risk in speaking up. So the debate doesn't get shut down by expertise, because expertise isn't required to have a view. It just keeps going, fed by the fact that every person in the room feels equally entitled to weigh in, and nobody feels entitled to end the conversation. That is the real mechanism underneath bike shedding, and it's worth stating plainly because it is genuinely counterintuitive. The size and importance of a decision and the amount of time a group spends arguing about it are not correlated the way most people assume. In fact, they frequently run in opposite directions. Big, high-stakes, technically loaded decisions tend to get approved fast, because complexity forces deference to whoever actually knows the subject, and deference shortens debate. Small, low-stakes, easily understood decisions drag on, because familiarity invites everyone's opinion at once, and no single voice carries more authority than any other, so nothing shortens the debate. There's also a quieter social dynamic at work here. Weighing in on something everyone understands feels safe and even collegial, a low-cost way to participate and be seen participating, while weighing in on something technical feels risky, because being wrong in public carries a cost that staying silent does not. There is a status dimension to this too, and it rarely gets named. In a technical debate, staying quiet reads as appropriate humility. In a bike shed debate, staying quiet can read as disengagement, as though you don't care about the team or the office. So people speak up not necessarily because they have something essential to add, but because silence itself carries a small social cost when the topic feels accessible. That pressure alone is enough to keep a trivial debate going long after every useful point has already been made twice. Once you see this pattern, you start noticing it everywhere, not just in Parkinson's committee room, but in your own calendar, your own Slack threads, your own last 3 meetings. Take software teams. A decision about core system architecture, which database to use, how to structure services, how the whole product will scale for the next 3 years, is enormously consequential. It will shape engineering costs, hiring needs, and technical debt for years to come. And yet in most companies, that decision gets made quickly by 2 or 3 senior engineers in a single working session, because almost nobody else in the room can meaningfully evaluate the trade-offs between, say, 2 different database architectures. Compare that to a debate about which font the marketing site should use, or what exact shade of blue belongs on the login button. Everyone has opinions about fonts. Everyone has looked at buttons their entire life. That conversation can eat 3 separate meetings, spill into email threads, and generate a shared document of preferences, while the actual architecture decision, the one that will make or break the product's ability to scale, it gets rubber-stamped in 15 minutes by the 2 people actually qualified to make the call. The same split shows up around money. A department head can walk into a room and get a large marketing budget approved with barely a question because the justification is dense with numbers, projections, and channel data that only the finance and marketing leads can really interrogate. Nobody else in the room wants to challenge a customer acquisition cost model they don't fully understand, but propose changing the snacks in the office kitchen, and suddenly everyone is an expert with a strong opinion. Somebody wants healthier options. Somebody else doesn't want to lose the chips. A third person has strong feelings about which vendor delivers on time and which one substitutes cheaper brands. What should be a 5-minute logistics decision turns into a running debate across multiple meetings that, cumulatively, outlasts the budget conversation by a wide margin. You see it again in people decisions. Restructuring a department, or hiring a senior leader who will oversee dozens of people and a significant chunk of the annual budget, tends to move through leadership fast because the people making the call have specialized judgment about org design and talent that the rest of the company defers to almost automatically. But announce a new company mug, a new holiday party venue, or a redesigned intranet homepage, and watch the thread explode with opinions from people who never weigh in on anything else. None of those decisions matter much in the long run. All of them feel personal and accessible, which is exactly why they generate endless commentary from people who would never dream of second-guessing a hiring decision above their level. Legal and contract work shows the same split. A commercial contract with dense indemnification clauses and liability caps gets reviewed by counsel and signed off with a short summary to the rest of leadership, because almost nobody else can evaluate the clauses line by line. But ask that same leadership team to agree on wording for an internal announcement email, and the thread runs for days, because everyone can read plain English, and everyone has a preference about tone. The contract carries far more legal exposure than the email ever will, yet the email gets more scrutiny, purely because more people feel qualified to have a view on it. Here's the part nobody expects, and it's the part that actually matters if you run meetings for a living. Bikeshedding is not caused by people being petty, lazy, or bad at their jobs. It is a completely predictable consequence of how confidence and competence interact inside groups. People calibrate their willingness to speak up based on how qualified they feel in the moment, not on how important the topic actually is to the business. A topic that feels accessible invites participation regardless of its real stakes. A topic that feels technical suppresses participation regardless of its real stakes. That means the amount of debate a topic generates tells you almost nothing about how much it actually matters, and in a room full of smart, engaged, well-meaning people, the relationship can run entirely backwards, where the most trivial item on the agenda gets the loudest and longest debate precisely because it's the only place where everyone gets to play. This is where the concept becomes genuinely useful, rather than just a clever bit of history to drop into a meeting. Once you can name the pattern in real time, while it's happening in front of you, you can interrupt it. And that changes how a leader should actually run a room, not just how they think about one afterward. The first fix is to notice the mismatch as it's happening, in the moment, not in a post-mortem. When a decision that should take 5 minutes has already eaten 20, that imbalance itself is the signal worth acting on. It is not a sign the topic secretly matters more than you thought going in. It is almost always a sign that the group has slipped into bikeshedding, because the topic is easy enough for everyone to have an opinion and nobody in the room has taken responsibility for closing the discussion. The fix is not to let the debate keep running until people talk themselves out naturally, because they usually won't. The fix is to name a single decision maker on the spot, out loud, and move the meeting forward immediately. The second fix is to pre-assign ownership before the meeting even starts, not scramble to do it live once the debate has already taken hold. Low-stakes, easily reversible decisions, like snack vendors, font choices, or meeting room names, should have one named owner who makes the call independently and simply reports it to the group, not a committee that debates it live in front of everyone. Reserve real open-floor discussion for decisions where expertise genuinely differs, and the stakes actually justify the time, like architecture, budget, hiring, and strategic direction. If a decision is both reversible and cheap to get wrong, it almost never deserves a room full of people weighing in. The third fix is to time-box the discussion explicitly, out loud, before the topic even opens. Say the number before anyone starts talking. Tell the room plainly that there are 5 minutes on this topic, and then a decision gets made whether or not everyone feels fully aligned by the end of it. A stated time limit changes the psychology of the room immediately. People stop treating the conversation as open-ended and start treating it as a decision that will get made, regardless of how thoroughly it gets debated, which shortens debate on its own without anyone needing to be shut down. The fourth fix is to separate reversible decisions from irreversible ones and treat them differently on purpose every time, not case by case. Some well-known operators describe this as one-way doors versus two-way doors, decisions you can undo cheaply and quickly versus decisions you genuinely cannot take back once made. A wrong call on office snacks costs you a week, and maybe a complaint email. A wrong call on system architecture can cost a year of engineering time and a painful migration later. Naming out loud which kind of door the group is standing in front of forces the room to allocate its attention correctly based on actual consequences, instead of by gut instinct and how comfortable the topic feels. The fifth fix is cultural, and it's by far the hardest one to build, but it matters more than any single meeting tactic on this list. Teams that handle bikeshedding well have normalized saying, plainly and without apology, that a topic isn't worth the room's time right now, without that statement landing as an insult to whoever raised it in good faith. That takes real psychological safety and a shared understanding across the team that skipping open debate on trivial matters isn't dismissiveness, it's discipline applied consistently. The alternative, letting every topic get equal floor time regardless of its actual stakes, feels fair and egalitarian in the moment. But it quietly wastes the one resource a team can never get back, which is its collective attention. Here's a quieter cost of bikeshedding that rarely gets named out loud, and this is worth sitting with. Meetings that run long on trivial topics don't just waste an afternoon. They train your best people to stop bringing up the important topics at all, because they've learned, correctly, that the room can't reliably tell the difference between a 5-minute call and a 5-hour one. That's a discipline problem more than a scheduling problem, and it gets fixed the same way any discipline problem gets fixed, with a rule that's applied consistently every single time, not with good intentions or willpower, in the moment when the debate is already underway. None of this means trivial decisions don't matter at all, and it would be a mistake to walk away thinking that. Office snacks matter to morale. Fonts matter to brand perception. The point isn't that small things are worthless. The point is that the time a group spends debating a decision should track its actual stakes, and left unmanaged, groups get that badly wrong in a very specific and entirely predictable direction every single time. The failure isn't random and it isn't a character flaw in your team. It's structural. It happens because expertise silences people while simplicity invites them in. And that pull is strong enough to override good judgment unless a leader actively counteracts it on purpose. It's also worth saying that seniority doesn't automatically fix this. Plenty of experienced executives who would never dream of micromanaging a technical roadmap will happily spend 20 minutes on the wording of a holiday email, simply because the topic offers an easy, low-risk way to exercise judgment in front of peers. The instinct to bikeshed isn't a junior employee problem. It shows up at every level of an organization, which is exactly why it needs a structural fix rather than a hope that people will simply grow out of it with experience. So the next time you're sitting in a meeting and the group is 30 minutes deep into a debate about a shade of blue, While a genuinely consequential decision earlier on, the same agenda got waved through in 90 seconds without a single follow-up question, you're not watching a group that doesn't care about the big stuff. You're watching the law of triviality play out exactly as Parkinson described it almost 70 years ago, in a finance committee room that no longer exists, arguing about a bike shed that was never even built. Name the pattern out loud. Assign a single owner. Set a clock before the topic opens. Then move on without apologizing for it. Save the open floor for the reactor, not the roof color. If that changed how you see your team, follow for more.